My wife cheated on me with her boss, then suddenly filed for divorce claiming I stole $200, $0 from our joint account. Turns out she's been secretly selling our house and hiding the evidence to get everything, including the $500, $0 inheritance I never knew about. I never thought I'd be the guy writing a story like this, but here I am. The kind of story where everything falls apart in a matter of weeks and you're left trying to piece together what's real and what's just a lie. It all started with little things. She'd be acting distant, texting more than usual, and I kept catching her in tiny lies about where she was or who she was with. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she was stressed at work, or maybe she just needed some space. But then came the signs that something was way off. My wife always seemed like the perfect girl, beautiful, confident, a little bitchy at times but in a way that I liked. She's the kind of woman who knows what she wants and isn't afraid to get it. We'd been together for 5 years, married for 3, and I thought we had a good thing going. We weren't perfect, but I trusted her. Until I started noticing the little things. Her phone always locked when she'd leave the room, her avoiding eye contact, and her getting defensive whenever I asked about her whereabouts. One night I was working late at my office when I decided to check her phone. I'd never done that before, but something felt off. I figured I'd just see if she'd been texting someone else, maybe a friend. But what I found wasn't just innocent texts. There were messages, explicit messages between her and her boss, Mark. They'd been talking about meeting up after hours, about her needing a real man, and even about how she liked the way Mark made her feel. I saw photos, too, screenshots of their conversations, some with her in bed, some of her in lingerie. I was stunned. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe it. My wife was cheating on me with her boss. Mark was a guy I'd met a few times, seemed like a decent enough guy, but clearly he was no good for. I felt sick. All those nights I thought she was out with friends or working late. They were with Mark. The betrayal cut deep and I didn't know what to do with the rage and hurt swelling inside me. The next day I confronted her. I found her in the kitchen making coffee, her face innocent but her eyes a little too wide. I threw the phone on the table and told her I knew everything. Her face went pale for a second, then she started with her usual lies. "You're crazy," she said. "You're just paranoid. I don't know what you're talking about." But I had proof. I showed her the messages, the photos. She tried to deny it, saying I was stalking her, that she was just talking to her, that it meant nothing. But I knew better. She sat there, blinking fast, trying to act like she wasn't caught. Her voice was high-pitched, defensive. She kept insisting she was innocent, that Mark was just a friend, that I was overreacting. But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. I saw the way she lied, the way she tried to gaslight me. I felt a mixture of shock, anger, and heartbreak all at once. How could she do this? How could she betray me like this after everything? I'd given her my trust, my love, my life. And she threw it all away for some guy at work who probably only cared about her body. That moment hit me hard. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about everything, her lies, her cheating, the fact that she'd been sneaking around behind my back. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the sense that I had been so blind, so naive. I kept asking myself, how long has this been going on? How much of my life has she been hiding from me? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I wanted to believe she loved me, but her actions told a different story. And then there was the money. I started digging into our finances, trying to find out if she'd done anything else behind my back. I had a feeling this wasn't just about her cheating. It was about something bigger. She always had a way of manipulating money, but I never really paid attention until now. I noticed some strange transactions on our joint account, large withdrawals, wire transfers to unknown accounts, and even some cash withdrawals I didn't recognize. I got access to her emails, her texts, and it all pointed to one thing. She'd been hiding a lot from me. It turns out had been secretly selling our house, my house, the one I thought was our future, and hiding the evidence. I discovered she'd been funneling money out, probably to cover her tracks, and I found emails where she was talking about getting everything and cutting me out. She'd even lied about the inheritance I never knew I had, $500,000 my grandfather left me years ago, which she'd been trying to hide so she could get her hands on it all. I was stunned. How could someone I loved do this? How could she betray me so thoroughly? This was just the beginning. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let her get away with this. I started planning quietly, carefully. I needed to find out exactly how deep her deception went, and I knew I couldn't trust her anymore. The betrayal was beyond anything I'd ever imagined, and I was furious. I didn't want her to get away with it. I wanted justice, even if it meant tearing my life apart to get it. After I uncovered everything, her affair, the secret sale of the house, the hidden inheritance, I felt like I was hit by a freight train. My mind was racing, trying to process how someone I trusted so completely could turn out to be this manipulative, lying bitch. I spent hours poring over bank statements, emails, and texts, trying to piece together just how far she'd gone. It wasn't just the affair. It was a full-blown scheme to take everything I had, and I knew I couldn't confront her without a plan. The first thing I did was to get a copy of the divorce papers she filed the next day. She didn't even tell me she was planning to leave. She just handed me the papers with that bitchy smirk she always wore when she thought she was winning. She claimed I was a thief, that I'd stolen $200, $0 from our joint account. That made my blood boil. She was spinning her own lies, trying to paint me as the villain. She knew damn well she was the one who'd been siphoning money, selling the house, and hiding. The inheritance. I was furious, but I kept my cool. I wanted to catch her in her lies. While she was busy trying to spin her story, I started making my own moves. I hired a private investigator, someone I knew from work, discreet but sharp. I needed to see if she was up to anything else, if she had more secrets tucked away. Turns out she'd been meeting with her boss, Mark, almost every night. They'd been sneaking around, planning her escape, and I had proof. I caught her leaving a hotel with him, her dress disheveled, her lipstick smudged. That was the moment I knew I had enough evidence to really hit her where it hurt. Meanwhile, I was also digging into the financial side of things. I wanted to see exactly what she'd done with the money from the house sale and the inheritance. I found bank transfers to offshore accounts, large cash withdrawals, and even a few suspicious wire transfers to some shady entities. She'd been planning this for a while, I realized. She sold the house secretly, probably before I even knew she was planning to leave. I felt so betrayed, like she'd been plotting to steal my life from under my nose. The emotional toll was brutal. I felt sick, betrayed, and furious. I kept asking myself how I missed all the signs. How did I not see her for what she really was? I loved her, or at least I thought I did. Now I wasn't so sure. The woman I married was gone, replaced by someone who lied, cheated, and schemed behind my back. I kept replaying our memories, trying to find clues I'd missed, trying to understand how she could do this to me. It was like waking up from a nightmare, only it was real. And it was worse than any bad dream because this was my life, and someone I trusted had turned into my worst enemy. I also knew I had to get ahead of her plans. She was trying to hide everything, cover her tracks, and leave me with nothing. I couldn't let that happen. I started documenting everything, saving emails, taking screenshots, recording her calls when I could. I wanted to build a case, not just for the divorce but for what she'd done. I'd always been a straightforward guy, but now I realized I had to be a little more cunning. I couldn't let her manipulate her way out of this. I had to stand my ground and fight for what was rightfully mine. The hardest part was watching her lie and manipulate, knowing I was powerless to stop her at first. I'd always been the trusting type, but that trust was shattered into pieces. I felt like a fool for not seeing the signs earlier, for not realizing she was capable of this level of deception. The worst part was knowing she'd probably been planning this for months, maybe longer. I felt so stupid, so naive. How could I have missed it? How could I have been so blind to her true nature? But I also knew I couldn't let her win. I wasn't going down without a fight. I started gathering all the evidence I could, bank statements, emails, texts, even her phone logs. I wanted to expose her for what she really was, a liar, a cheat, a thief. I knew she'd try to spin her way out, but I had enough to show the truth. I wasn't just angry, I was determined. This was about more than just revenge. It was about reclaiming my Life, my money, and my dignity. I'd been betrayed in the worst way, but I was going to make sure she paid for it. By the time I had all the pieces lined up, her affair with Mark, the sale of the house, the hidden inheritance, the suspicious transactions, I realized I needed to act fast. Was cunning. She was trying to cover her tracks, but she underestimated how much I'd uncovered. I decided I couldn't confront her directly just yet. I had to be strategic. I wanted her to think she still had control, but I was already planning my move. The first thing I did was to consult with a lawyer. I found someone who specialized in divorce and financial fraud. I explained everything: her affair, the sale of the house, the inheritance, the money she'd been siphoning off. I wanted to know my rights, what she could do to me, and how I could protect myself. The lawyer told me that I had a solid case for not only divorce, but also for recovering the money she'd fraudulently taken. He advised me to keep everything documented and to be discreet. That's when I realized I needed to be even more careful. Next, I contacted the bank to freeze our joint accounts. I didn't want her to be able to drain any more money or transfer funds. I also started transferring my own money into a separate account, just in case. It was a gamble, but I knew I had to protect what was mine. Meanwhile, I kept gathering evidence, taking screenshots of her messages, saving her emails, and making copies of everything I could find. I knew she was planning to disappear, and I wanted to have everything ready. One night, I caught her trying to sell the last piece of our property, our family home. She was meeting with a shady real estate agent, trying to finalize the sale without my knowledge. I followed her, snapped photos, and confronted her right there in the parking lot. Her face twisted into that familiar smirk, like she thought she was untouchable. She lied again, said she was just exploring options, but I knew better. I had the proof I needed now. I called the lawyer immediately, and he told me to file an emergency injunction to stop the sale. I did, and it worked. Our house was temporarily off the market. At that point, I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. I was finally taking control, but I also knew how dangerous could be. She was calculating, manipulative. I was walking a tightrope, trying not to tip her off. I started planning my next moves, how to expose her, how to get her to admit everything. I also reached out to Mark, the boss she'd been sleeping with. I wanted to hear his side, see how deep this went. Turns out, he was just as much a part of her scheme as she was. Their affair was more than just a fling. It was a calculated move to get rid of me and take everything I had. Meanwhile, I was also dealing with the emotional fallout. Every day felt like one moment I was furious, ready to tear her apart. The next I was numb, questioning everything I believed in. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and deeply hurt. How could she do this to me? After 5 years, I thought I knew her, but I didn't. I realized I'd been living with a woman who was willing to lie, cheat, and manipulate her way to the top. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and I wasn't sure how to process it all. But I knew one thing: I couldn't let her get away with it. She'd already stolen so much: my trust, my money, my peace of mind. Now I had to fight to get some of it back. I was determined to see her pay for what she'd done, even if it meant destroying everything we'd built together. I had to stand up for myself, for what was rightfully mine. I wasn't going down without a fight, and I was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings, surveillance, and planning. I kept everything tight, no unnecessary moves, no slip-ups. I knew was getting more desperate. Her calls and texts to Mark increased, but I was ready for that. I had recorded some of their conversations, and I made sure to keep a log of every suspicious activity. I was building a case, not just to fight her in court, but to expose her for the scam artist she'd become. One evening, I got a call from my lawyer. He told me he'd hired her own attorney and was planning to push the divorce through quickly. She was trying to say I was abusive, that I'd stolen money, that I was unstable. None of it was true, but I knew she'd lie to get her way. I had to be prepared for a fight, especially since she was trying to spin a narrative that painted her as the victim. I wasn't going to let her do that. I had enough evidence to prove she was the one at fault. I also discovered she'd been sneaking around with Mark even more. They'd been meeting in hotels, sometimes in different cities. I found hotel receipts, photos she'd sent him, and even a recent email where she talked about getting everything she wanted and finally being free. That was the turning point for me. I realized she wasn't just cheating, I was being used. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer, all while pretending to be the perfect wife. Then came the shocking part. I found out she sold the house, my house behind my back. She transferred ownership to her sister, who was in on the scheme. I confronted her about it and she just shrugged it off, acting like it was no big deal. She claimed she'd done it to save us from debt, but I knew better. She'd been trying to disappear, to start fresh with Mark and the money she thought she'd get. But I had the proof, and I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything. I decided to push for full custody of our dog, Max, who was the only thing that kept me sane through all this chaos. That was my anchor, my little piece of normalcy in a storm of lies. I also filed for an emergency hearing to freeze any further transactions related to the sale of the house and the inheritance. The court granted the freeze, and I felt a little bit of relief. At least I was stopping her from bleeding me dry. Throughout all this, I was constantly battling an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I'd trusted with my life, and she'd turned out to be the biggest con artist I'd ever met. There were moments I wanted to break down, scream, or just run away from it all. But I knew I had to stay strong. I had to see this through, not just for myself but to make sure she didn't get away with what she'd done. Every day I reminded myself that I was fighting for what was rightfully mine, my money, my house, my dignity. I also started reaching out to a few close friends for support. It was hard admitting I'd been played so badly, but I knew I couldn't do this alone. They told me to keep gathering evidence, stay calm, and not let her manipulate me anymore. That was the hardest part, resisting the urge to lash out or confront her directly. I had to be smarter. I had to be 10 steps ahead. One thing I never expected was how much I'd learn about her true nature. Had always been bitchy, demanding, and manipulative, but I never saw her as a criminal. Now I saw her as someone capable of anything: lying, cheating, selling our home, hiding inheritance, and even trying to ruin me financially. It was a wake-up call. I never thought I'd be that guy, fighting to protect what's mine from someone I loved. But here I am, standing my ground, ready for whatever comes next. The weeks went on and the situation kept escalating. I had all my evidence in order: everything from her secret emails, the hotel receipts, the bank transactions, even her conversations with Mark. I knew I'd be able to expose her fully in court, but I also realized I needed to get ahead of her next move. Was desperate now, and I could see her trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. She was calling lawyers, trying to stall, and even attempting to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. One day, I discovered she'd made an appointment with a private investigator of her own. I wasn't surprised. She was always thinking 2 steps ahead. I knew she was trying to dig up dirt on me, maybe to paint me as the bad guy or to find some way to get the upper hand in the divorce. I had to be cautious. I doubled down on my own surveillance, making sure I had everything documented. I wasn't going to let her catch me off guard again. Meanwhile, I learned she'd been trying to manipulate our mutual friends into thinking I was the one at fault. She was spreading stories about how I'd been abusive, how I'd stolen money, how I was mentally unstable. It was classic. Always spinning stories to serve her own interests. I stayed quiet, knowing that the truth would come out, but it was infuriating to see her trying to tarnish my reputation with lies. I kept my distance from everyone she was trying to influence and focused on my legal strategy. I also uncovered something that hit even harder. She'd been secretly selling off parts of our assets, small jewelry, some antiques, even some of my personal belongings, trying to liquidate everything before I could stop her. I found receipts for those sales, and it made me realize how much she'd been planning to disappear with everything I worked for. That was the moment I knew I had to act fast. I filed a motion to seize her assets, including the inheritance money, which she was trying to hide in a Swiss bank account I didn't even know existed. The emotional toll was intense. Every day brought a new shock, a new betrayal. I'd wake up feeling like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I kept asking myself how I'd missed all the signs, how I'd been so blind to her true nature. I loved her, but I also hated her. What she was doing. I felt like I'd been played for a fool, like I'd been living in a fantasy that turned into a nightmare overnight. The pain was raw, and I wondered if I'd ever find a way to heal. But amidst all the chaos, I found a strange sense of clarity. I realized I'd been holding on to a version of that didn't exist anymore. That woman was gone long before I found the evidence. The real was a liar, a schemer, someone capable of destroying everything we had built for her own greed. That realization made me more determined. I wasn't just fighting for the money or the house. I was fighting to reclaim my life from a person I no longer recognized. I knew that the final battle was coming. The court date was set, and I was ready. I'd gathered all my evidence, hired the best legal team I could afford, and prepared myself for the fight of my life. I also knew I needed to stay emotionally strong, to not let her manipulations get to me. I had to remember that I was the victim here, and I had every right to fight for what was mine. Most of all, I learned a hard truth. Trust is fragile, and sometimes the people closest to you can turn out to be the biggest enemies. That realization stung worse than anything, but I refused to let her win. I was going to see this through, no matter what. I owed it to myself to get justice and to rebuild what she tried to destroy. Because in the end, I knew I deserved better than a wife who lied, cheated, and schemed her way into stealing my life. Final court hearing was a whirlwind. I sat there, watching sit across from me, her face a mask of feigned innocence, while I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. Everything I had uncovered, her affair, the sale of the house, the hidden inheritance, the money laundering, was laid out clearly with irrefutable evidence. The judge listened carefully as my lawyer presented the case, showing every email, every bank transfer, every secret sale. His lawyer tried to spin her stories, but it was all falling apart. Her lies couldn't hold up against the facts. When the judge finally made the ruling, it was like a heavy weight was lifted off my chest. She was ordered to return the inheritance money and pay back the stolen funds. The sale of the house was declared invalid since she'd sold it without my consent, and I was awarded full custody of Max, my loyal little companion. Was also ordered to pay a substantial settlement for emotional damages and financial fraud. It was more than I expected, but honestly, I didn't care about the money as much as I cared about finally having some closure. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a strange sense of liberation. All the stress, the lies, the betrayal, it was finally over. I had fought tooth and nail for my rights, and I'd won. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the emptiness. I realized I'd lost a part of myself in this process, my trust, my sense of security. But I also knew I'd come out stronger. I'd learned a lot about myself through this nightmare, especially about the importance of being cautious and vigilant. In the months that followed, I slowly rebuilt my life. I moved into a new apartment, away from the chaos and the ghosts of that marriage. I got a new job, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the courage to pursue. I kept Max close, and he became my anchor again. I also started therapy, trying to process everything I'd been through. It's not easy, and I still have moments of anger and sadness, but I'm getting there. Looking back, I realize I learned some hard lessons. Trust is fragile, and sometimes the people you love the most can betray you in ways you never imagined. But I also learned that I'm resilient. I can fight for myself. I can stand up against deception and manipulation. And most importantly, I deserve honesty and respect, things I'll never take for granted again. To anyone out there going through something similar, my advice is simple. Document everything, trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to fight for what's right. Sometimes, the truth has to come out, no matter how much someone tries to hide it. And when it does, you'll realize that you're stronger than you ever thought possible. I may have lost a lot, but I gained a new sense of strength and clarity. And in the end, that's worth more than any inheritance or house.